People ask me, the few who ask me anything real, whether I get bored. Living alone at 82, in a house at the end of a long driveway in Maine, with my wife gone and my children grown, and most of my friends dead, whether the days aren't long, whether the time doesn't drag, whether an old man alone in a quiet house doesn't sit there, hour after hour, with nothing to do and nowhere to be and no one to be it with, slowly going out of his mind with the sheer empty length of the days. And the honest answer, which surprises people, is no, I don't get bored. Almost never. There are hard hours. I've talked about the 3 in the morning hours, and those are real. But boredom, the specific condition of having nothing to occupy you and time dragging heavy and empty, is something I almost never feel anymore. And I say anymore because there was a time when I did. In the first year and a half after Helen died, the boredom was one of the worst things. The days were endless. The hours would not move. I would look at the clock and it would say 10 in the morning and I could not imagine how I was going to get through to the evening. And then I would look again what felt like hours later, and it would say 10:15. That was real, and it was terrible, and I got out of it, and getting out of it is what I want to talk about today. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter. My wife Helen died in October of 2017, and I've lived alone in the house I built with my own hands ever since. And over these 7 years, mostly through trial and error, and a fair amount of getting it wrong, I worked out 6 rules for living alone without being bored. Not 6 activities, not 6 hobbies. 6 rules, 6 principles that changed my whole relationship to time and to the days, and turned the endless empty hours of that first year and a half into the full, occupied, genuinely interesting days I have now. Because that's the thing I most want to say at the start. Boredom is not really about having nothing to do. That's what I thought it was, in the beginning. I thought I was bored because I'd lost the things that used to fill my time. The work, the marriage, the daily traffic of a full life. And so I thought the solution was to find new things to fill the time, new activities to plug into the empty hours. And that approach failed, completely, for a year and a half, because it turns out that boredom is not about having nothing to do. Boredom is about your relationship to time and attention and meaning. And you can fix that relationship, and when you fix it, the boredom lifts, and the same quiet, solitary days that used to drag endlessly become full and interesting and quick. Sit with me, the fire's going. Let me tell you the 6 rules. The first rule is that you must have a reason to get up before you go to sleep. This sounds simple, and it is the most important of the 6, so I want to make sure I say it clearly. Every night before I go to sleep, I know what I'm getting up for the next morning. Not in a vague sense, not I'll get up and see what the day brings. In a specific sense, there is a particular thing or several particular things that the next day contains, that I am oriented toward, that give the next morning a shape and a pull before it's even arrived. Let me explain why this matters so much, because I learned it the hard way. In that first year and a half, I would go to sleep with no reason to get up. The next day was a blank. It contained nothing in particular. No work I had to do, no one I had to see, no thing I was oriented toward. And so when I woke in the morning, I woke into a void. There was nothing pulling me up out of the bed, nothing the day was for, nothing to move toward. And a day you wake into with nothing pulling you forward is a day that will drag. Because time only moves quickly when you're moving toward something, and if you're moving toward nothing, time has no reason to move at all. The fix was to make sure that every day contained at least one thing that I was oriented toward, and to know what it was before I went to sleep the night before. It doesn't have to be big. Some days it's just, tomorrow I'm going to finish the cabinet I've been working on. Some days it's, tomorrow I'm going to call David and ask about the project. Some days it's, tomorrow the Sullivans are coming for supper, and I need to plan what to cook. Some days it's small. Tomorrow I'm going to drive to the good hardware store 2 towns over and get the brass hinges for the box and have lunch at the diner there. But there is always something. Every single night before I sleep, I know at least one thing the next day is for. And that one thing changes everything about the morning. Because I wake up oriented. I wake up with a pull. There's a thing the day contains, and I'm moving toward it. and the moving toward gives the day a direction and a shape from the very first moment. The void is gone. The day is not a blank to be endured. It's a container with something in it, and I'm already moving toward the something before my feet are even on the floor. I want to be clear that this is not about being busy. It's not about filling every hour, cramming the day with activities so there's no room for the emptiness. That's a different thing, and it doesn't work. I've watched people try to outrun boredom by staying frantically busy, and it doesn't fix the underlying problem. It just exhausts them. This is not about busyness. It's about orientation, about the day having a direction, a thing it's pointed toward. So that time has a reason to move. One thing is enough. One thing that you're oriented toward, known in advance, gives the whole day a shape. The busyness is beside the point. The orientation is everything. I want to tell you about how I actually built this into my nights, because the principle is easy to agree with and harder to make into a practice. What I do in the evening before I go up to bed is spend a moment, just a moment, 30 seconds, deciding what tomorrow is for. It's part of the walk through the house, part of the closing down of the day. I bank the fire, I check the doors, and somewhere in there I ask myself, what's tomorrow for? And I answer it. Not elaborately. Just tomorrow I'll get the hinges fitted on the box. Or, tomorrow I'll call David. I've been meaning to ask him about the thing with his daughter. Or, tomorrow I'll drive up to see Marie. It's been a few weeks. Whatever it is, I name it before I sleep, so that it's there waiting for me when I wake. And it changes the waking. That's the thing I most want people to understand. The waking is the hardest part of the day for someone who lives alone, especially someone who's lost the person they used to wake up beside. You surface from sleep and there's the moment of remembering. Remembering that she's gone. Remembering that you're alone. Remembering that the house is empty. And into that moment, that hard, tender moment of surfacing, you can either wake into a void with nothing to move toward, or you can wake into a day that already has a shape, a thing it's for, a direction. The reason to get up doesn't erase the hard moment of remembering, but it gives the remembering somewhere to go. It says, yes, she's gone, and yes, you're alone. And also, there's the box to finish today, and you were looking forward to fitting those hinges. The reason to get up is what carries you across the hard moment of the waking and into the day. Without it, you can lie there in the hard moment for a long time, sometimes too long. With it, the hard moment passes, because there's a day pulling you up out of it. The second rule is that you must be in the middle of something, always. There must always be a thing in progress. This is related to the first rule, but it's different, and the difference is important. The first rule is about each individual day having a direction. The second rule is about your life, at any given moment, having a project in progress, something ongoing, something not finished, something that continues from one day to the next, and that you can return to and advance a little at a time. For me, most obviously, this is the work in the shop. There is always something on the bench, always. When I finish one thing, I start the next thing before I've quite finished, so that there's never a moment where nothing is in progress. The cabinet gets finished and I've already got the wood picked out for the toy box. The toy box gets finished and I've already started thinking about the repair I promised the Sullivans. There is always a thing in progress, always a project I'm in the middle of, always something to return to tomorrow. And this matters more than you might think for the problem of boredom, because a project in progress is a thing that reaches into the future. When you're in the middle of something, the future is not a blank. It's the place where the thing gets continued, gets advanced, gets finished. Tomorrow is not an empty box. Tomorrow is the day I add the next coat of finish, or fit the next joint, or start the part I've been thinking about. The project in progress connects today to tomorrow to next week, gives them a thread that runs through them, makes them part of a continuous something rather than a series of disconnected empty days. The man with nothing in progress wakes each day into a fresh void. The man with something in progress wakes each day into the continuation of a thing he cares about. And the difference between those two ways of waking is most of the difference between a bored life and a full one. Now I have the shop, and I understand that not everyone has a shop, and I don't want this rule to sound like it only works for a carpenter. The project in progress can be anything. can be a garden, which is one of the best of all projects in progress because it literally continues, day by day, growing and changing and requiring attention across a whole season. It can be a book you're reading, a long one, a serious one, that you advance a little each day and think about between sessions. It can be learning something. I've watched people take up a language or an instrument late in life and find in the slow daily progress exactly the kind of continuing project that keeps the days connected. It can be a piece of writing, a family history, a set of letters, a correspondence. It can be the restoration of something, a piece of furniture, an old clock, a boat. What matters is not what it is. What matters is that it continues, that it's not finished, that there is always a thing you're in the middle of that reaches from today into tomorrow and gives tomorrow a reason to come. And when you finish something, because you will finish things, that's the point of them. The rule is that you start the next thing immediately, before the gap can open. The gap is the danger. The empty stretch between finishing one thing and starting the next is where the boredom gets back in. So I don't allow the gap. I'm starting the next thing before I finish the last one. There is always something in progress. There's a deeper thing underneath this rule that I want to name, because I think it's the real reason it works. A project in progress is a form of hope. That sounds large for a cabinet or a garden, but I mean it. When you're in the middle of making something, you're oriented toward its completion, toward the future moment when it will be finished and good. And that orientation toward a good future moment is, at bottom, a form of hope. You're betting on the future. You're investing today's effort in tomorrow's result. You're saying, with your hands and your time, I believe there will be a tomorrow, and I believe it's worth working toward. For a man in his 80s, alone, aware of how little time is likely left, that form of hope is not small. It would be easy at my age to stop investing in the future, to think, what's the point of starting something that will take weeks when I don't know if I have weeks? Why plant a tree I may not see grow? Why begin a project I may not finish? That thinking is a trap, and it's a trap that leads directly to boredom and worse than boredom. Because a life with no investment in the future is a life that has, in a sense, already ended. That is just waiting out the clock. The project in progress refuses that. It insists on the future. It plants the tree anyway. It starts the cabinet that will take 3 weeks, even though the man starting it is 82, and makes no assumptions about having the 3 weeks. And that insistence, that refusal to stop investing in a future you can't count on, is one of the things that keeps a life alive right up to its end. I have things in progress that I may not finish. I start them anyway. Because the having them in progress is itself the point, is itself a way of being alive. Is itself the hope that keeps the days worth living. If I finish them, good. If I don't, then I died in the middle of making something, oriented toward a good future, still investing, still hoping, and that is a far better way to go than to have stopped making things years before the end because I decided the future wasn't worth betting on. The third rule is that you must keep learning things, because a mind that has stopped learning is a mind that has started to close. And a closed mind is bored no matter how much is happening around it. I came to this one late, and it surprised me, because I'd never thought of myself as a learner. I was a carpenter. I learned my trade young, and I practiced it for 45 years. And I thought of learning as something you did when you were young, to acquire the skills you'd use for the rest of your life. And then you were done learning, and you spent the rest of your years using what you'd learned. That's wrong. I know now that it's wrong, and I learned it was wrong from my granddaughter Lily, who has been, in this respect and several others, one of the great teachers of my old age. Lily left a book on my kitchen table a few years ago. I've told this story before. A book about the geology of the Gulf of Maine, about the bedrock this whole coast sits on, the stone in the walls of this house, the ice that shaped the land I've lived on for 82 years. And I resisted it for a while, because it wasn't the kind of thing I read. And then I opened it, and I couldn't put it down. And what I felt, reading it, was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. The specific excitement of learning something genuinely new, of encountering a whole domain of knowledge I'd known nothing about, that had been right under my feet my entire life, that I'd walked on and built on, and never understood. That feeling, the excitement of the genuinely new, turned out to be one of the great antidotes to boredom, and I'd been living without it for years, without realizing what I was missing. Because here's the thing about learning. It makes the world bigger, and a bigger world is a less boring world. When I understood the geology under my feet, every walk became more interesting because I was walking on something I now understood, something with a history I could read in the rocks. When I learned about the birds at the feeder, really learned, read about them, understood their behavior, the 10 minutes at the window became richer because I was seeing more, understanding more, connected to more. Learning doesn't just fill time. It deepens everything else you do because it gives you more to see and understand in everything around you. So I keep learning now, deliberately, as a rule. I read things I know nothing about. I let Lily send me books that stretch me. I've learned, the last few years, a fair amount about geology, about birds, about the natural history of Maine, about the history of the paper industry my father worked in, which I lived alongside my whole childhood and never understood. I'm learning about the stars. Lily got me a book, and now on clear nights I go out and I can name a few things I couldn't name before. And the naming makes the sky less empty and more full. None of this is practical. None of it will ever be used for anything. That's not the point. The point is that a mind that is still learning is a mind that is still growing, still opening, still encountering the new. And a mind like that does not get bored, because the world keeps getting bigger, and a world that keeps getting bigger cannot be exhausted, and a world that cannot be exhausted is never boring. The mind that stops learning starts to close. It goes over the same familiar ground, the same old thoughts, the same well-worn memories, and the familiar ground gets more familiar and more worn, and eventually there's nothing left in it that's fresh, and that's a kind of boredom that no activity can fix, because the boredom is inside the mind rather than in the circumstances. Keep learning. Keep the mind open. Keep the world getting bigger. It's one of the surest defenses against the boredom of a long, solitary old age. I want to say something to the people who think they're too old to learn, because I was one of those people and I was wrong, and the wrongness cost me years I could have spent learning things. There's a belief, deep in a lot of us, that learning belongs to the young, that the mind past a certain age is done, set, finished, no longer capable of taking in the genuinely new. And I held that belief for most of my life. And it was one of the things that made my early widowhood so empty, because I'd written off learning as something that was behind me, a young person's activity, not available to a man in his 70s. It's not true. I'm the proof it's not true. I've learned more genuinely new things in the last 5 years, in my late 70s and early 80s, than I learned in the 30 years before that, when I thought I was too busy and then thought I was too old. The mind at 80 is slower than the mind at 20 in some ways. I don't remember names the way I used to, and I have to read a hard passage twice sometimes where once would have done. But the mind at 80 has something the mind at 20 doesn't have, which is 80 years of context to hang new knowledge on. When I learn something new now, it connects to a lifetime of other things I know, and the connecting makes it richer and more meaningful than it could have been when I was young and had less to connect it to. I understand the geology of Maine more deeply than a young student would, because I've lived on this land for 82 years, and I can connect the geology to a lifetime of walking it and building on it and watching it. The old mind learns differently than the young mind, but it learns, and in some ways it learns better, because it has more to learn with. So if you've written off learning because you think you're too old, take it back up. You're not too old. Nobody is too old this side of the diseases that take the mind, and even some of those can be held off by the very act of keeping the mind working. Learn something, anything. Something you know nothing about, something that has nothing to do with your practical life. Something purely for the pleasure of understanding a thing you didn't understand before. It's one of the great available pleasures of an old age, and it's free and it's endless, and it will keep you from being bored for as long as your mind holds out. The fourth rule is that you must pay attention to small things, because the person who can find interest in small things is never without something interesting, and the person who can only find interest in big things will run out of big things and be bored the rest of the time. This is maybe the subtlest of the rules, and the one that took me longest to really understand. So let me try to say it carefully. When you're young and busy, and your life is full of big things, the career, the marriage, the children, the projects, the events, you don't need to pay attention to small things, because the big things fill your attention entirely. Your days are occupied by matters of consequence, and the small things, the tiny textures of ordinary existence, pass beneath your notice because you have bigger things to notice. When you're old and alone, and the big things are mostly behind you, the career is over, the marriage has ended in death, the children are grown and gone. The big things no longer fill your attention because there aren't enough of them anymore. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, because they've spent their whole lives finding their interest in big things. And now the big things are gone, and they don't know how to find interest in anything else. And so they're bored, surrounded by a world full of small interesting things they never learn to see. The skill of old age, one of the central skills, one of the ones that most determines whether your last decades are rich or empty, is the skill of finding interest in small things. And it is a skill. It can be learned. I learned it late after Helen died, largely by necessity, because the big things were gone and I had to find something or go mad with the emptiness. What I found, when I started really paying attention to small things, is that the small things are inexhaustible. The big things are few and they run out. The small things are infinite and they never run out. There is more to notice in the light coming through the shop window on a single afternoon than a person could exhaust in a lifetime of looking. There is more happening at the bird feeder in a single winter than I could fully understand if I watched it for 100 years. There is more to see in the grain of a single piece of butternut than I've managed to see in 60 years of looking at wood. The small things do not run out. That's the secret of them. That's why the person who can find interest in small things is never bored. Because they've hitched their attention to something inexhaustible, something that will never be used up, something that offers more than a lifetime could ever take in. I pay attention to small things now, deliberately, as a practice. The light, the birds, the wood, the frost patterns on the shop window, which are different every cold morning and which I've come to find genuinely beautiful. The particular way the cedars move in different kinds of wind. The changing of the seasons, which when you actually watch it is not a matter of 4 seasons, but of 100 small transitions, each one different, each one worth noticing. The behavior of the fox who crosses the yard, of the squirrel who raids the feeder, of the chickadees who I swear I'm beginning to be able to tell apart. The taste of the food I cook, really tasted rather than just eaten. The feel of a good tool in the hand, the weight and balance of it, which I've felt 10,000 times, and which still, when I pay attention, gives a particular satisfaction. None of these things is big. All of them are inexhaustible. And a life spent paying attention to inexhaustible things is a life that cannot be bored. Because there is always, always something more to notice, something more to see, something more to be interested in. The world is bottomlessly interesting if you learn to look at it closely enough. The boredom was never in the world. It was in my failure to look closely. I learned this in the end from Helen, though I didn't understand that I was learning it from her until years after she was gone. Helen was a noticer. It was one of the deepest things about her, and one of the things I most took for granted while she was alive. She noticed things. She'd stop on a walk to look at something, a plant, a stone, the way the light was doing something particular through the trees. And she'd say, "Look at this, Walter. Look at that." And I, hurrying, always hurrying on my way to the next thing, would look, barely, and say something like, "Yes, that's nice," and keep moving. I didn't understand what she was doing. I thought she was just slow, just easily distracted, just prone to stopping when we could have been getting where we were going. I understand now that she wasn't slow. She was awake. She was paying attention to the inexhaustible small things. And the paying attention was why she was never bored a day in her life, why she could sit contentedly in a room for an hour with no entertainment and no task, and be perfectly happy, why the ordinary world was, for her, endlessly full. She had the skill I'm describing, the skill of finding interest in small things. And she had it naturally, and she practiced it constantly, and it made her one of the most contented people I ever knew, though I didn't understand the source of the contentment till I'd lost her and had to find it for myself. When she died, and I was alone, and I was bored in that dragging, terrible way, I eventually, slowly, by necessity, started doing what Helen had always done, stopping to look, noticing the small things, paying attention, and as I did it, I felt her in it, felt that I was finally learning the things she'd been trying to show me for 54 years, finally understanding the look at this, Walter that I'd brushed past 10,000 times. She'd been teaching me all those years how not to be bored in the life that was coming. The solitary old age I couldn't have imagined then. I just wasn't ready to learn it until I had no choice. Now I do it every day, and every time I stop to really look at something small, the frost, the light, the grain, the bird, I'm doing what Helen did, carrying forward her way of being awake in the world, and it's one of the ways she's still with me, still teaching me, still making my life fuller than it would be, without what she showed me. The fifth rule is that you must have other people in your life, regularly and really, because there is a specific kind of boredom that is actually loneliness, and no amount of activity will cure it. Because the thing missing is not activity but people. I want to distinguish this carefully, because it took me a while to understand that some of what I was calling boredom in that first hard year and a half was not really boredom at all. It was loneliness wearing the costume of boredom. And the reason the distinction matters is that I kept trying to fix it with activity, kept trying to find things to do to fill the empty hours. And the activity didn't work, because the problem wasn't a lack of activity. The problem was a lack of people. And you cannot fix a people problem with an activity solution. You can be extremely busy and still be suffering from the specific emptiness that only people can fill. And if you mistake that emptiness for boredom and try to fix it with more activity, you'll just end up busy and still empty. The way you can distinguish this people hunger from real boredom, is this. Real boredom is fixed by engagement. You find something interesting to do, you engage with it, and the boredom lifts. The people hunger is not fixed by engagement. You find something interesting to do, you engage with it fully, and there's still something missing, a hollowness underneath the engagement. A sense that even though you're occupied, you're not quite all right. That hollowness underneath the occupation is the tell. That's the people hunger. And the only thing that fixes it is people. I've talked in other conversations about tending the web, about reaching out, about building relationships back into a solitary life. I won't repeat all of it here, but I want to say it in the context of boredom specifically, because I think a lot of people who think they're bored are actually lonely, and they're trying to fix the wrong problem. If you're occupied, if you have things to do, projects in progress, small things to notice, plenty to keep your hands and mind busy, and you're still feeling something that looks like boredom, a restlessness, a hollowness, a sense that something's missing even though you're not idle, then the odds are good that what you're feeling is not boredom at all. It's the need for people, and the fix is not another activity. The fix is a phone call, a visit, a shared meal, a conversation. The fix is another human being brought into your life, regularly and really, filling the specific hollowness that only people can fill. I keep people in my life now, deliberately, as one of the rules of not being bored. Though bored is not quite the right word for what people cure. The Sunday calls with David, the Thursday calls with Susan, the coffee with Elaine, the lunch with Marie, the suppers with the Sullivans, the letters with Lily, the Saturday mornings at the diner among the company of strangers. All of it is partly for this, partly to fill the hollowness that no activity fills, the people hunger that masquerades as boredom, the specific emptiness that a solitary life produces, and that only other people can relieve. Keep people in your life, not just for company, though for company too, but because some of what feels like boredom is loneliness, and loneliness has only one cure. And the cure is people. The sixth rule, and this is the one I've saved for last because it's the deepest and the one that underlies all the others, is that you must find the days meaningful, because a meaningful day is never boring, and a meaningless day is boring no matter how full it is. This is the rule that took me longest to understand and that I'm least able to explain, but I'm going to try, because I think it's the truest thing I know about boredom, and I think it's the thing that most people miss. Boredom, at its deepest level, is not about having nothing to do. I said that at the start, and I want to come back to it now, at the end, because I understand it better now than I did when I said it. Boredom, at its deepest level, is about meaninglessness. It's the feeling that what you're doing doesn't matter, that the day doesn't matter, that the time you're spending is not being spent on anything that counts. You can be extremely busy and still be bored, if the busyness is meaningless. And you can be doing almost nothing, be sitting in a chair by a fire, looking out at the cedars, and not be bored at all, if what you're doing feels meaningful. The deepest cure for boredom, then, is not activity. It's meaning. It's the sense that your days matter, that what you're doing counts for something, that your life, even now, even alone, even at 82, even in the ordinary quiet of a solitary existence, is a life that means something. And here is what I've found about where that meaning comes from. In a life like mine, stripped of most of the things that used to provide it, it doesn't come from big achievements. Those are behind me, and they were never really where the meaning was anyway. It comes from a few specific things. It comes from making things that will outlast me. The cabinet that will be in Susan's kitchen after I'm gone. The cradle that will hold babies I'll never meet. The house is still standing across the county. It comes from the people I love and the care I take of them and the care they take of me. The meaning that lives in a relationship, in the ongoing tending of a bond, in mattering to another person, and having them matter to you. It comes from bearing witness, from being the keeper of the stories, the one who remembers Helen and my parents and the whole vanished world of my earlier life, and who passes those stories forward to the grandchildren so they don't die with me. It comes from paying attention to the world, really attending to it, which is a kind of reverence, a way of honoring the fact of existence by actually noticing it. And it comes, in some way I can't fully articulate, simply from being alive and awake and present, from the sheer fact of consciousness in a beautiful and terrible and endlessly interesting world, which is a gift I did nothing to deserve, and won't have forever and try, these days, not to waste those things. Making, loving, witnessing, attending, being present, those are where the meaning comes from. And the meaning is what makes the days not boring. A day spent making something, caring for someone, remembering what deserves to be remembered, noticing what deserves to be noticed, and being fully present to the fact of being alive. That day is not boring, even if from the outside it looks like nothing much, even if all it contained was an old man in a workshop and a phone call and a walk and a supper eaten alone. That day was full, not full of activity, full of meaning. And a day full of meaning is the opposite of a boring day, no matter how quiet it looks from outside. I want to say one more thing about meaning because I think there's a piece of it that's especially important for old people living alone, and it's this. The meaning of your days is not diminished by the fact that they're small or quiet, or witnessed by no one but yourself. There's a temptation when you're old and alone and your days have gotten quiet, to feel that your life has become meaningless because it's become small. The big stage is gone, the career where your work affected many people, the family where you were at the center of a bustling household, the years when you mattered visibly to many. Now it's just you, in a quiet house, doing quiet things that no one sees. And it can feel, in that quiet, that the meaning has drained out along with the size, that a life this small can't hold much meaning, that you've dwindled into insignificance. That's false. I want to say it as strongly as I can. That is false. The meaning of a life is not proportional to its size or its visibility. The cabinet I make alone in my shop, that no one sees me make, that will outlive me in someone's kitchen, that has meaning, full meaning, real meaning, whether or not anyone witnesses the making. The attention I pay to the light on the cedars, that no one knows I'm paying, that has meaning, is a form of reverence, is a way of honoring existence, whether or not anyone is there to see me do it. The love I carry for Helen and the children and the grandchildren, the care I take of my relationships, the stories I keep, all of it has meaning, full meaning, that does not depend on an audience, that does not require a big stage. that is complete in itself whether the world is watching or not. A small, quiet life, lived with attention and care and love and presence, is not a meaningless life. It may be one of the most meaningful kinds of life there is. A life stripped down to the essentials, to the things that actually matter, freed from the noise and the striving and the performance, able to attend fully to the few deep things that were always what mattered most. My life is smaller now than it's ever been, and it is not less meaningful for being small. If anything, it's more meaningful, because the smallness has burned away everything that wasn't essential and left me with only the things that count. That's not a diminishment, that's a distillation. And a distilled life, a life reduced to its essence, lived with full attention to what remains. That is not a bored life, and it is not a meaningless life. It is, in its quiet way, a life at its fullest. The fire's burned down to good coals now. It's late. I've been talking for a long time. Longer than I usually do because this is a subject I care about. Because I remember the boredom of that first year and a half. The terrible dragging emptiness of the endless hours. And because I know how many people are living in that right now. Old, alone, the big things behind them, the days stretching out ahead empty and long, wondering how they're going to fill the years they have left. I want to say to those people, it doesn't have to be like that. It was like that for me, and it isn't anymore. And the difference wasn't finding more activities to fill the time. The difference was the 6 rules, waking up with a reason to get up, always being in the middle of something, never stopping learning, paying attention to small things, keeping people in my life, and finding the days meaningful. Do those 6 things, and the boredom lifts. Not because you're busier. I'm not especially busy. My days are quiet. I spend a lot of them alone in a workshop or in a chair by a fire. But because your relationship to time and attention and meaning has changed. And when that relationship changes, the same quiet, solitary days that used to drag endlessly become full and interesting and quick. The hours that used to crawl now move. The days that used to be endless now feel, if anything, too short. I get to the end of them and I'm surprised because there was so much in them, so much to make and notice and think about and tend. And I didn't get to all of it, and there's more waiting tomorrow. That's not boredom. That's the opposite of boredom. That's a full life, lived alone, at 82, in a quiet house at the end of a long driveway in Maine. And if I can have that, a man who spent a year and a half in the dragging emptiness, who thought the days would never move again, then it's available to anyone willing to do the work of the 6 rules. The days are good now, full and quiet and quick and good. I get up with a reason. I'm always in the middle of something. I'm always learning something new. I pay attention to the small, inexhaustible things. I keep my people close. And I try, every day, to spend the day on things that matter. And at the end of it, when I sit here by the fire and think back over the day, it's never a day I was bored in. It's a day I lived in, fully, which is all any of us can do, at any age, alone or not. Live in the days, fully, while we have them. If anything I said tonight reached you, you can subscribe to walk with me a while longer. I read every comment. Tell me about your days. Tell me whether they drag or whether they're full, and what you found that helps. I'd like to know. Take care of yourself. Wake up with a reason. Stay in the middle of something. Keep learning. Notice the small things. Keep your people close. And spend your days on what matters. And if you're in the dragging emptiness right now, if the hours won't move and the days won't end and you're wondering how you're going to fill the years, start with just one of the 6. You don't have to do all 6 at once. I didn't. Start with 1. Start with the easiest one for you, whatever it is. Find one thing to be in the middle of, or decide, tonight, one reason to get up tomorrow, or pick up one book about one thing you know nothing about, or make one phone call, just one of the 6, done today, and then again tomorrow, and the one will start to make room for the others, and slowly the dragging emptiness will begin to lift, the way it lifted for me, not all at once but steadily, over months, until one day you'll notice that you got to the end of a day and weren't bored in it. And then it'll happen again. and again, and eventually, the boredom that seemed permanent will be behind you. The way it's behind me now. It was permanent seeming for me too. In that first year and a half, I could not imagine ever again being a man whose days were full and quick and good. I thought the emptiness was just what my life was now, what it would be until the end. I was wrong. It wasn't permanent. It lifted. And if it lifted for me, a grieving old carpenter alone in a quiet house who thought the days would never move again, it can lift for you. The fire's banked. The coals will hold till morning, and tomorrow, I already know what tomorrow's for. I'll see you next time.